Today we are going to begin the fourth chapter of history, which is Rural Life and Society. In this chapter, we will be discussing about the different systems for the collection of revenue and their effects on the rural life and society. Earlier, zamindars in Bengal, Bihar and Odisha had been functionaries who held the right to collect revenue on behalf of the Mughal emperor and his representative or Diwan in Bengal. The Diwan supervised the zamindars to ensure that they were neither lax nor overly stringent. Means they should not be very careless, and at the same time they should not be very strict towards the collection of revenue. When the East India Company was awarded the Diwani or the revenue control of Bengal by the Mughal emperor following the Battle of Buxar, the company focused mainly on how to collect large amounts of revenue without bothering to institute, means without caring about, to institute a balanced system of assessment. The primary objective of the company still remained trade. So their primary objective was still trade. The income from Bengal was to help it finance the Indian raw materials like fine cotton and silk for export to England. Now this would mean that it no longer needed to import gold and silver from Britain in order to buy the Indian goods, because they were satisfying their needs for raw material from Bengal. They were getting it from the income of Bengal, which was helping them to finance the Indian raw material like fine cotton and silk, which they were exporting to England. However, such a single-minded collection of highest revenue possible from the peasants of Bengal, means the farmers of Bengal, led to a crisis in the economy of Bengal, because they were not caring about the needs of the peasants, of the farmers. They were only focusing on their own needs of collection of highest possible revenue to satisfy their needs of getting more and more raw material which could be exported to England. Due to this, the artisans started to leave villages since they were being forced to sell their goods to the company at low prices. Now, who are the artisans? Artisans are the workers in a skilled trade, especially one that involves making things by hand. So they started to leave villages since they were being forced to sell their goods to the company at very low prices. The peasants were unable to pay the high demands of revenue. In 1770, a terrible famine is the extreme scarcity of food. So due to scarcity of food, around 10 million people were killed in Bengal. So due to the selfish motives of the company, the condition of the people living in Bengal, it was just degrading day by day. Now when the news of this economic crisis reached the British Parliament, it passed another act in 1784 called Pitt's India Act, under which the revenue and other administrative systems had to be built up to streamline the company rule in Bengal, which the Parliament suspected was not being done properly. Lord Charles Cornwallis was sent to India in 1784 as the new Governor General of the British territories in India to reform the decimal state of revenue and other administrative system in Bengal and other states. So, to reform the Dismal state means very pitiful, very disgraceful state of revenue and other administrative system in Bengal and other states. Lord Charles Cornwallis was sent to India as the new Governor General of the British territories in India. Now, Lord Charles Cornwallis, he introduced a new system of collection of revenue in Bengal, which was known as permanent settlement. So it was introduced by Lord Charles Cornwallis in 1793 in Bengal. The permanent settlement was a grand contract between the East India Company and the Bengal landholders like zamindars and independent talukdars, which laid down a new system of revenue administration in the state of Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. Through this policy, the East India Company tried to achieve the following objectives. So the first objective of this settlement was to ensure a minimum revenue for the company so that its trading activities should not be hampered. To develop a system that would promote the agricultural production. Now, why they wanted to promote the agricultural production? Because if there would not have been sufficient agricultural production in the state, the farmers would not be able to pay the sufficient amount of the required amount of revenue to the company. So this would affect their trading activities in the state. So that is why they wanted to promote the agricultural production. Their another objective was to create an intermediary. Intermediary means a mediator. An intermediary class of Indian revenue collectors by forging. Forging means by building. By building an alliance between the zamindar class and the company so that the responsibility for both the agricultural production and revenue collection should rest on these zamindars instead of the company. They also wanted to direct the energies of the company officials to other spheres of administration. Now we will discuss about the features of the permanent settlement. What were the features of the permanent settlement? The zamindars who earlier collected the revenue on behalf of the Mughal state from the farmers having ownership right over the land they cultivated were made the owners of the land. They were expected to collect the assessed revenue from the peasants or the farmers who became their tenants and deposit it with the company. So the farmers, they were their tenants, means they were renting the land and working on the land and depositing the revenue to the zamindars, and zamindars were further depositing the assessed revenue to the company. The total revenue to be paid was calculated on the basis of last 10 years records of yield and the measurement of land. The revenue amount was fixed and the settlement was made permanent. The zamindars were required to pay 10/11th of the revenue to the government, 10 by 11th part of the yield. That much of revenue was given to the government by the zamindars and were allowed to keep the remaining 1/10th part of the total yield. In case the zamindars made efforts and succeeded in increasing the agricultural production, the government was not going to claim any extra charges and only zamindars were to be beneficiary. However, If a zamindar failed to pay the revenue on time, some part of his land or the entire zamindari territory was to be auctioned to settle the company's claim. It was expected by the policymakers that since the zamindars would try to increase their own share of revenue collection by expanding cultivation and improving production, the peasants would not have any financial crunch and so they would pay the taxes on time. Now, what were the impacts of permanent settlement on the economic structure of Bengal? However, contrary to the expectations of the company, zamindars regularly failed to pay the high revenue demand in the early decades after the permanent settlement. They faced a number of problems in collecting the revenue on time. The unpaid balances accumulated. In several cases, zamindar's land was auctioned by the company to settle the dues. It was because of the following reasons. The first reason was that the revenue was fixed regardless of the harvest and had to be paid punctually. Sometimes the peasants could not pay the taxes on time due to some genuine hindrances like natural calamity or some accidental loss of produce. The zamindars found that the permanent settlement limited their power to collect rent from the ryot or the peasant and manage their zamindari, as the company had appointed a collector and brought all the local kacharis or courts under his supervision, which the zamindars had earlier dominated. But sometimes ryots deliberately delayed payment because they happened to work on the land of some rich peasant called jotedar, who was only happy to see the zamindars in trouble. The jotedars had acquired vast areas of land, controlled local trade as well as money lending, exercised immense power over the poorer cultivators of the region who worked under them and were called under ryots. Very often, the zamindars did not stay in the rural area for long, choosing to lead a life of luxury in the cities. Thus, they became absentee landlords. They did not work for the improvement of agriculture. The peasants became the ultimate victims of this system, who only needed to meet the revenue demands but did not receive any help or support from the zamindars as their landlord. Our next topic is impoverishment of peasantry. Impoverishment means the process of becoming poor. So the excessive land revenue demand resulted in the loss of initiative on the part of the peasants. They generally did not invest any money to improve their land as there was no cash available. The greater portion of whatever they produced was taken away as revenue. The government expected the zamindars to be totally responsible for the improvement of the agricultural land, but did not invest in the land. Naturally, the peasants lost all interest in increasing the agricultural production. These harmful effects of high taxation became more unbearable due to the rigid manner of its collection. Land revenue had to be paid promptly on the fixed dates, even if the harvest was below normal or had failed completely due to some reasons. More often, the inability to pay revenue drove the peasants to borrow money at high rates of interest from the money lenders. Now the money lenders took advantage of the situation and they charged high rates of interest, and through cunning and deceitful measures such as false accounting, forged signatures, and making the debtor sign for larger amounts than he had borrowed got the peasants deeper and deeper into the debt till he parted with his land. Thus, the peasantry was crushed under the triple burden of the government, the zamindar or landlord, and the moneylender. After these three had taken their share, not much was left for the cultivator and his family to subsist on, means to survive on. This remained true not only in the case of Bengal, where they had lost their ownership of land, but even in the Mehalwari and Rotwari systems, where they had retained the right on their land. Our next topic is Mehalwari system of revenue collection. In the early 19th century, the market saw improving prices of agricultural products. The company officials felt restless because the permanent settlement did not allow them to revise the revenue. So the Mehalwari system was introduced in 1822 in the princely states of Awadh and Agra in Uttar Pradesh, parts of Orissa and Madhya Pradesh, and the erstwhile Punjab. It provided that the revenue assessment of the land could be revised periodically depending on the trend of the markets. Now, in this system, the revenue settlement was made with the revenue estate or mahal, which could be a single village or a group of villages. The head man of each mahal was made responsible for collecting the revenue from each peasant according to the area of land he owned. The company also reasoned that through this system, the villages and their separate cultural pattern could also be saved from outside influence, as the revenue collector in this case was not any other British agent but the head man of the village only. Next, we are going to discuss about the Rotwari system of revenue collection. The Rotwari system was introduced in Madras Presidency, and it later covered the Bombay Presidency as well as the whole of South India by Thomas Munro, the governor of Madras during 1819 to 26. The company decided that this area did not have traditional zamindars, and so the peasants, being the traditional tiller of the land, were recognized as the owner of their land. The system covered nearly all the southern states and many western states of India, including the erstwhile central province, that is Madhya Pradesh. This system resembled the Mughal revenue system, though Mughals rarely administered the southern territories directly. The ryots were free to sell or transfer their lands, but the system failed to protect the interest of the ryots. The rate of revenue was too high and the method of collection inflexible. The peasants were forced to take loans from money lenders, which ultimately led to same type of exploitation as seen elsewhere in Bengal, Awadh and other Mehalwari areas.